Broadway was founded by Jews, but what is the Jewish state of Broadway nowadays? Joining us today is Tony-winning Orthodox Jewish Broadway producer Dylan Kaplan, who shares with us his journey to an observant Jewish life, his journey to an award-winning Broadway producer, and how the two different parts of his identity intersect. Good morning, and welcome to Jew in the City Speaks with your host, Allison Josephs, also known as Jew in the City. We've been talking a lot about Jewish representation on this show. Jew in the City was founded originally to combat negative perceptions about Orthodox Jews in the world at large, but in the last year plus, we launched the first and only Jewish Hollywood Bureau. We've been working mostly in Hollywood itself, but there is a different piece of the entertainment industry that has its own world unto itself, and that's Broadway. And to join us today, probably, as far as I know, the only Orthodox Jew working in Broadway as a Tony-winning producer is our guest today, Dylan Kaplan, and he's currently producing the show that we believe is going to get a lot of awards at the Tonys, Sweeney Todd. So first of all, thank you so much for joining us and for, being kind of one of the few in Broadway to be, working as a producer right now. I should say producer as an Orthodox Jew. There we go. That part would make more sense. Where did you grow up Jewishly? How did you grow up Jewishly?
I actually grew up Reform. So I grew up in Fort Lauderdale, Florida, which actually has a very vibrant Orthodox Jewish community, which I became a Baal Tshuva when I was in college. So coming back to Florida, it was great because there were tons of kosher restaurants and tons of Jewish community to go to in Miami. But I grew up really with not a lot of Jewish background. I did what most Reform Jews do. I got bar mitzvahed, and I've always had a love of performing. So that kind of translated into my work. So when I was in high school, I was in my Reform Temple's choir. It was very nice. And so music is kind of how I got my into Judaism, because music led to prayer, and that's kind of how I connected with God. So it's how I got into this, was my love of music, my love of prayer. And actually, one of the big things was watching Fiddler on the Roof. So as a Reformed Jew, I would see Tevye on the big screen, and I thought to myself, well, Tevye can talk to God, so I can talk to God. So anyone can have a relationship with God. I could talk to God. I don't need to know these rules. I could have a relationship with him and just talk to him whenever. So when I would walk my dog, I actually would talk to God. I wouldn't tell my parents. I wouldn't tell my brothers. But that's what I would do at night. So I would reflect on my day, and I would talk to God. And I did it for years until I went off to college. So that's kind of how I got my into Judaism.
It's so fascinating that no one sort of in your present day was sort of modeling that, but you saw it, from Tevye. I also saw Fiddler on the Roof as a non-observant Jew, as a conservative Jew growing up. And what that show did for me, I love tradition, I loved the songs, but it seemed like sort of this more religious life, like a sort of shtetl life, that it didn't belong in the modern era. And so I think there's a lot of people who kind of see Fiddler on the Roof, and then when they see sort of modern day Jews dressed kind of in beards and hats, it kind of feels like this is, sort of from yesteryear, from the shtetl, doesn't really belong in, the modern world. But I love that Tevye taught you how to talk to God. So look, I guess there can be some, positive, sort of Jewish growth from media. Love to hear about that. So what happened when you were in college? So you're already talking to God for a while on dog walks. Do you connect with some Jewish programming on campus?
Yeah, so I was part of NYU Hillel. So I went to NYU Tisch for drama. And then on campus, I was connected primarily. I was at Hillel for a brief period, but I primarily connected with Mayor. And in my freshman year, I went on my birthright trip with my brother. So we did Taglit, and in that moment, I really found my identity. So I was in the Holy Land. I'm a Reformed Jew in the Holy Land, but I'm like, wow, there's so many things that they don't teach you, in Reform school. I'm literally at King David's tomb, and I'm at the Western Wall, and when I'm at the probably the largest Holocaust museum in the world, and I'm seeing all this stuff. I'm like, wow, like this is really powerful. And for my sibling, he took it as this was a great trip. But for me, I took it as this is like spiritually enlightening. So at the time I wanted to stay. I was very nationalistic at the time. I was super Zionistic, and I wanted to join the IDF. And my family said, no, you can't do that. And I left only to find out that 6 months later, I would receive another invitation from Mayor to go back to Israel. So I finished my second semester of my freshman year, and I was just lacking something. Like, it really felt like when I left the Holy Land, like something was missing in me. And I was going through my acting classes, and I was like, I just feel like I'm missing something. Then over the summer, I decided that I was going to start praying 3 times a day. So I'm at NYU Hillel. The scene is set, and it's me, and I'm doing Shemona Esrei for the first time. I'm talking to God. I'm saying, hey, I'm going to do organized prayer. I'm going to start doing this in English, and because I didn't know Hebrew all that well. Like, I couldn't translate the Hebrew to English, so I was just like, I'm just going to read the English. And we love that in the Torah it teaches that God can hear prayer in every language, which is a beautiful concept. So I did it in English for about 3 days, and then I got a call from my rabbi from Mayor saying someone dropped out of their version of a birthright trip. Would you like to come back to Israel again? So since their trip wasn't Taglit, it was a private trip, I basically was just handed another free trip to Israel. I was like, wow, this is great. I said, is there a catch? He's like, no catch, just come. I'm like, okay. Like, okay, I guess I'm doing this again. And so I thought, okay, this has to be a sign from God, because, like, who sends someone back to the Holy Land twice in the span of a year for free? So it's like, clearly I missed something the first time. So I go there and I learn about this thing called the Talmud, and I learn about other texts that I didn't know about, and Mishnah Berurah, and I learned about the Chavetz Chaim, and I learned about Rambam, and I learned about all these great figures. And I'm with these amazing guys at Makom Shlomo for 2.5 weeks. And I think to myself, like, this is it. It wasn't the IDF. I was supposed to go to yeshiva for a year and take a gap year and experience this. So I go back to my parents. I say, Mom, Dad, I'm doing this. I'm going to stay in Israel for a year. And my parents said, no, you can't do that. I'm like, what? I'm like, it's not the army. I'm not going to die. They're like, yeah, but we don't want you.
Worse, you'll become Orthodox.
Yeah, they're like, we don't want you to become a fanatic. I'm like, what? They're like, yeah, you're gonna become a black hat guy, like pious and running around, and that's not good. I said, I mean, this is a joke, so I hope that the Orthodox community doesn't take it as such, because I was Reform at the time. But I was saying, but the penguins look so happy. Like, there was this concept, and I was like, okay, they wear a black hat, but they're, like, really nice people. Like, and they seem to understand the meaning of life. Like, they seem to be very happy. So I said, well, they seem happy.
Did you have a perception of, you like Tevye, did you have a perception of Orthodox Jews before you became observant? Like, you were motivated to pray, but did you have, growing up in Florida, you must have seen some of them around. Did you have any thoughts about how they look happy and like they had meaning back when you were a kid and a Reform?
Yeah, weirdly enough, didn't see that many Orthodox Jews growing up where I was in Fort Lauderdale. Just because I went to a public elementary, middle school.
At any media,
private high school.
Other than Fiddler on the Roof, did you have any sort of like run-ins with them in the media in terms of seeing them in movies or books or news headlines?
Surprisingly, no. When I went to college, my first take on seeing an Orthodox Jew was that I was on the subway and I thought they were Amish. I didn't think they were Jews. I thought they were Amish. And then when I was in college, I met Chabad a little bit, because there was Chabad kind of on campus, but it was at Bowery. But in Union Square, they came up to me and they said, do you want to put on tefillin? They're like, are you Jewish? I'm like, yes. And they're like, you should put tefillin on. I didn't really know who these Chabad guys were. But I was like, okay, so they aren't Amish, they're Jewish, and they look more religious than what I'm used to. So that actually runs into the second part of my story. So my parents wouldn't let me go to Makom Shlomo. So I ended up looking for religion for about 3 more years. And I experienced meeting people at Mayor who were more conservadox, people telling me that they were kosher half the time. They would like eat out kosher home, but outside they would do whatever. I was like, okay, that doesn't really make any sense. So I was like, I don't understand how there's such flexibility in the rules. I'm like, if someone gives you a rule, you got to follow the rules. So, and then I went to Crown Heights with a friend and went dancing with a bunch of Chabadniks at a Fabregan. And I saw these guys and they were all wearing black hats. I'm like, okay, this is a little too intense for me. Granted, this is after I already did yeshiva, but I was like, okay, black hats are a little too intense. I'm not ready for that yet. Maybe one day, I don't know. So I was a little scared of that. And then I get to my senior year of college, and I don't know why, but I took a 20-somethings class where they told me that all the Orthodox Jews are getting married young. And I'm 21 years old, and they're like, oh, well, 19 to 21 is when most of the Orthodox Jews are getting married. And I'm like, is this it? Am I going to lose out on having an Orthodox wife? Is this the end? Because I'm 21, I'm turning 22. Is this game over for me? So I talked to a woman named Yael in the Broadway world, and this is right before my first Broadway show company that ended up winning the Tony. And I said to her, you know, things are looking really good for me. I'm looking for a wife. She goes, oh, you should go to Manhattan Jewish Experience. I'm like, oh, Manhattan Jewish Experience. What is this place? So I get there and I meet a fellow who's wearing a blue suit and a blue hat. I'm like, oh, what is this? And they're like, oh, yeah, they're like, I'm modern Orthodox. I'm like, modern Orthodox? I spent 3 years and I didn't know what that even was until now. So I like meet modern Orthodox people, and then I joined this MJE fellowship, and that's pretty remarkable. And it's all fun and games until COVID happened in February, because it was a year-long program, so it kind of got cut short for me. But my rabbi there, Rabbi Mark Wilds, said to me, you should go to Israel. You should go to yeshiva. I said, been there, done that. And like my parents.
Wait, so when did that happen? When did you skip that part?
That was my senior year. So I did this fellowship, and then partially through the fellowship, Rabbi Mark Wilds told me I should go to Israel. And I said, yeah, I already did this with my parents, and it did not go well.
Oh, you did the asking. You did the asking, and you asked and answered.
Like,
got it.
Been there, done that, got the no already, was really sad, and had to come back and twice, and was very, very disappointed. And he said, oh, well, you should go to this place called YU. I'm like, YU? What is YU? I'm like, first I was shocked at modern Orthodoxy, and then he said there's this place called Yeshiva University. I'm like, huh? There's a college that's also a yeshiva? I said, so what is it? Is it a yeshiva or a college? And he goes, that's a long story. I'll tell you another time. He's like, well, you should go. I'm like, okay. So he gets me in these 2 classes with Rabbi Benjamin Blech and Rabbi Mordecai, his name, I think it's Brewer. But anyway, I was learning with these 2 fantastic Ravs at YU, auditing their classes for free. And I was going there and I was learning about Rambam and it's Rabbi Mordecai Becher. Yes. So I learned Rambam with Rabbi Becher, who was incredible, man. Yeah. And I, by the way, didn't really know much about Rambam at the time. So I was fascinated by the concept of the Rambam. I'm like, wow, this guy is like controversial and they're burning his books. He must be doing something right. So, and then I'm learning about davening and prayer and all this good stuff with Rabbi Blech and contemporary halachic values. And then COVID happens and we all go on Zoom and it's the end of the world. And I go back to Florida for 6 months. And I felt like I was getting closer. So when things started kind of getting normal, I went to Shar Yeshuv for a little bit in my final year of school. And I was there and everything was great. And then all the guys got COVID. And then I decided to go to Esha Torah because I thought, it's the end of the world and everyone's getting COVID here in New York. So I went to Israel and I went to Aish Torah for about 6 months. And then I went to Darchei Noam Chappelle for an academic year. And now I'm here.
So you really, I mean, this is a smorgasbord of Orthodox offerings, which, I think it's always good to know what's out there, because there are a range of, practices and communities. And, it's great that you were exposed to a little bit of everything. So now that we kind of have your Jewish background, and then how did your parents and, family and friends react when you did make that transition? Because they were very scared for you to go at the beginning, but I imagine you were getting to an old enough age where they saw that they couldn't actually tell you couldn't go at a certain point. How have they reacted to kind of, the Orthodox version of Dylan?
Yeah, them meeting Avraham was kind of a unique story. My mom today still says to me, "Why do you go by Avraham? I birthed you and called you Dylan." And I said, "Well, Mom, you gave me 2 names. Like, you didn't just give me one. I didn't come up with this Avraham name. You gave me this name too." So, so there's that. And my parents primarily didn't want me going to Machon Shlomo when I was a sophomore because they said to me they wanted me to finish college. They thought that if I went there that I would stay in Israel. And long term, my goal is to end up making Aliyah. I hope to do that in my mid-30s, once I've developed a career for myself so I can go there with financial security. I think something that also helped me was my fiance. So I had met my fiance. She grew up modern Orthodox in Woodmere. Her name is Sivia. She's lovely. And she's partially how I got on this bald tshuva journey track. She definitely accelerated it and told me, "Avraham, you need to go to Israel," when I was just getting comfortable with Shar Yeshuv.
By
Like,
the way, that's
"No."
exactly what Hashem told Avraham too. Avraham lech lecha. So I guess she also gave you the Avraham go to Israel. Okay, so she also encouraged you, and it's good because you need to do that learning to be able to, kind of know what you have to do as an observant Jew.
Yeah, so she definitely helped me, and I met her in my senior year just as I was finding modern Orthodoxy. Now I'm, I guess, modern Orthodoxy, but probably more on the Orthodox side because I did yeshiva for a year and a half.
So now take us through the kind of professional side of things. So singing got you to Judaism, but I guess it also got you to Broadway. So what did that path look like? Why did you decide you wanted to, go to NYU? I guess Tisch means you're automatically in the sort of entertainment side, but do they make you sort of select theater versus film early on? And kind of when did you know that you were interested in entertainment and then specifically theater?
Yeah, so I started off as a performer from the age of 12 to 18. When I was 13 or 14 years old, my grandfather toured me to NYU, and I was like, this is where I need to go. And I basically spent the next 5 years training as a performer in dance, singing, and acting, the whole deal. And I went to a camp called Frenchwoods where I was training like every single summer. I was in 55 shows by the time I went off to college. I was doing community theater like everywhere. At one point, I was doing 3 shows at a time. And I really thought that my goal was to end up on Broadway. So I thought NYU is the place to be.
Can you tell us any roles, any of the highlight roles, like kind of any leads in any of these plays?
Yeah. So surprisingly, when I was in high school, I got to play Sweeney Todd in Sweeney Todd. So being a producer on it now is kind of a homecoming moment for me. It's one of my favorite roles. I've played a plant in Little Shop of Horrors. I played a cat in Cats the Musical. I was Rum Tum Tugger and McCavity in Cats. I've been a magician. I played Houdini in Ragtime, who is Jewish, by the way. So that was like one of my few Jewish roles I got to do. I got to play the MC in Cabaret, which is also a Jewish role. And I never got to be in Fiddler. It's kind of one of my kickers. I'm like, wow, why did I never get to be in Fiddler? I've always wanted to do it. So maybe one day in the future I can audition for it on Broadway when it comes back. By the way, speaking of that show, Fiddler on the Roof in Yiddish, when it was off Broadway, was the most authentic Fiddler I ever saw. So
very cool. So fine. So you get a tour of NYU. You know this is where you're going to take your sort of career to the next level. And I imagine that everyone that goes to Tisch does not end up being a Broadway producer. So how do you go from, being a student of theater to kind of making it on Broadway? Because it's pretty impressive.
Yeah, I very quickly realized after my freshman year that I didn't being Jewish was one of the reasons why I stopped acting, surprisingly. Concept of Shabbos on Fridays, concept of having a family and settling down. When I was in acting school, my professors were telling me that you really just choose your craft over everything else. And if you don't have kids, you don't have kids. And if you don't have a husband, you don't have a husband. Or a wife, you just kind of, it's your craft first. And I thought to myself, like, yeah, that doesn't really work for what I'm going for. I don't want to like be on national tours while I'm a dad and have these things like deter me from being a proper father and things like that. And that's kind of what drove me into being a producer, because over the summer of my freshman year, when I got back from Makom and Shlomo, because I didn't do my year abroad, I actually did my first off-Broadway theater festival as a director and a producer at the New York New Works Theater Festival. So I did 2 shows there, and then I started getting my feet wet. I did shows at the Connolly Theater off Broadway. I did a show at La Mama at an off-Broadway theater with the theater company Planet Connections with my colleague Kimmy, who I'm giving a shout out to here because she's wonderful. And I just started doing shows off Broadway, and I really wasn't a student while I was at Tisch, which I'm saying that now for a later point. I wasn't a student now. I was really just working for the goal to get on Broadway. And the moment I realized I wasn't going to be an actor, I thought I need directing and producer credits to get there. And my credits ended up helping me in my networking. So my name kind of got out there in the industry, and I started networking. And then I met my business partner, Mr. Jim Kierstead, who gave me an internship my senior year, allowed me to get my foot in the door on Company the Musical, which ended up getting me my first Tony Award. And after that, he pitched me Sweeney Todd, literally in July. He said, I've got an even bigger project than Company. It's got the Hamilton creative team on it. And then I got on Sweeney Todd, and the rest is kind of history. Now at this point, I get pitched stuff all the time. But the hardest part is your first show. A lot of young producers and a lot of media people in our business, their first project is the hardest, because usually you don't get great shows as your first producer show. Usually you get bad shows. And that's hard because you have to build loyalty with your investors. So if you do a show that tanks and they lose all their money, it takes about 2 to 3 years for you to regain that trust. So it's hard.
I had on here a woman that got a deal on Shark Tank. She's kind of on her own, sort of ball chuva journey. And she told me this beautiful idea about the word mazal, which means kind of like fortune. We translated from Hebrew. And she said, it's makom zman lasot. So she said, basically, you have to be in the right place, makom, at the right time, zman, but then you have to be lasot, you have to be doing. And I think for a lot of people that, get their big break, part of it they see is at the right place at the right time, but they're also putting their efforts into, making the thing happen. I think besides, both sides of the story interesting, what I think I'm most curious about is how your 2 identities, your, sort of a Broadway producer identity and your Jewish identity, particularly your Orthodox identity, interface. So, the first thing, I guess, maybe let's talk more specifically about you as an Orthodox Jew. There's certainly Jews in Broadway, sort of a lot of Jews sort of, founding Broadway, writing some of the most, sort of beloved and known musicals of all time, but not very observant Jews. So kind of as you started to journey down this road of more observance, what did that look like in terms of your, professional life? How did the 2 play together? Did you have any fears, like any kind of reactions that you're allowed to talk about?
Yeah. So first off, on the Shark Tank point, I think a lot of it also has to do with patience too. Like, I was on Company the Musical in 2019 before COVID happened. So I literally waited 2 years for that show to open. Like, not knowing if my first show was ever going to open. And I had raised all the capital and I was in yeshiva when the show opened. I didn't even go to the opening night. I was in Israel at the time. So I ended up seeing the show, I think, 2 months before the Tonys, because I just flew in because I wanted to see the show, because I was in for Passover, and I just decided to do that. So I think it takes a lot of patience, too, as well as, being in the right place. Regarding my journey, I'd have to say it's fascinating. I've met maybe one Orthodox Jewish producer in the biz who told me that he doesn't wear his kippah to events or anything, really. And he basically hides his Orthodoxy. He keeps a kippah in his pocket. And when he goes home to his Orthodox community, he puts the kippah back on. I personally don't wear my kippah in New York, but that's just because I had like an altercation once with probably an anti-Semitic person, and for wearing a kippah and a suit and walking down the subway the wrong way, and someone kind of punched me in the shoulder, but I just do it for safety reasons, but not really out of like I'm trying to appease my Reformed Jews in the Broadway community. I just don't. I do it out of safety necessity. But Broadway, last season there really weren't a lot of Jewish shows, like at all. I actually thought that the age of doing Jewish shows was kind of ending with Fiddler on the Roof in Yiddish. It's like, okay, it seems like they're doing less and less Jewish shows now. And then I was totally blown away and surprised to find that this season they did Parade in Leopoldstadt, and probably those shows are going to end up winning this year. Which I was not. I mean, I knew that Leopoldstadt was coming and was. I mean, it's Tom Stoppard. He's one of the greater playwrights of our time. So to hear that he had found his Jewish identity and wrote this really powerful play, I was like, okay, this is one of his last shows ever. Just like how Company was Stephen Sondheim's last show ever, which is what drew me to it. So I think that has a lot going for it for best play. Parade, I think this is on the podcast too. I think Parade's going to win this year. So that's actually one of the reasons why I didn't get my tickets to the Tony Awards, is because I thought I was going to lose this year. I've heard such great things about the show. I actually haven't seen the show on Broadway. I saw the show at my sleepaway camp, so I know the show well. And was even offered the show. The only problem why I didn't go on the show is because I simultaneously had another revival at the same time. I had Sweeney Todd, so it was like, I'm not going to do two revivals that are going to compete against each other in one season. So it's the only reason why I didn't jump on it. Otherwise, I would have totally hopped on Parade, because Parade's a great story. And I think what you were saying before about the industry, I think there's a lot of Reformed Jews in the industry, but I think that they're all culturally observant in the zeitgeist that is the Jewish narrative, which I think is kind of interesting. Like, for people that don't follow, halacha, don't follow Shabbos, don't follow these things, they still feel a very deep connection to the Jewish narrative, the Jewish story, be it the Holocaust, be it the band's visit, be it Israel, be it Zionism. There's always like that deep connection. And that is kind of at the heart of Broadway. Broadway was created because Broadway and Hollywood were both created out of antisemitism, because Jews couldn't work in the fur district. Jews couldn't work in these other industries. So they found Broadway as a safe haven.
Publishing, written stuff,
Yeah.
So what about when you do have observances? Because sadly, sometimes some of the biggest challenges, observant Jews face come from fellow Jews. Now, I will also take ownership for the fact that there are Orthodox Jews who are closed-minded and closed off to Jews of other backgrounds. So, that's a problem that, we have in our own community. But have you had any pushback in terms of being able to observe, Shabbos, holidays, kosher, prayer, anything like that? Like, do you feel comfortable to be able to do those things in the Broadway space?
It's difficult, because from what I know about my cousin industries in Hollywood, they supposedly have a whole Orthodox community over there. Like, supposedly there's a rabbi there of Hollywood. Like, the whole California Hollywood community has their own, like, minions, their own shuls, their own everything. On Broadway, there really isn't much of a community. Like, I don't really know too many other Broadway producers that are Orthodox. At least men, because men would be wearing kippas. But I mean, I don't really know too many, so I just kind of don't talk about it. So I'm kind of a bit of a lone soldier in this regard, representing Broadway. I've been actually told by Orthodox Jews to pivot to film and TV because there is, more of a community in the Orthodox world in California than there is on
So
Broadway.
yes, but even the number of working Orthodox Jews as writers, directors, producers is still limited, which then I guess sort of leads me to my final question, which is, I think when we look at diversity, equity, and inclusion, Jews have sadly been excluded. And we're seeing this beautiful sort of new wave of trying to accommodate different groups and people from different backgrounds and creating spaces where people feel like they can lean into their identities. It has not happened for the Jews. And so even if no one ever sort of like specifically told you, don't wear that, don't eat that, don't, step aside to pray, if Jews were included in these spaces as groups that should, sort of be able to wear their Jewishness proudly, in an outward way, sort of being able to fully lean into their identity, I think there would be a different atmosphere on Broadway in Hollywood. So I guess thoughts about, the exclusion of Jews in inclusion spaces. I mean, the Oscars recently came out with diversity quotas to be able to be eligible for, Oscars starting in 2024. As far as I understand, there's nothing on Broadway that sort of includes Jews in inclusion spaces.
Yeah, we don't really have we don't have a community or a nonprofit dedicated to preserving Jewish stories or things like that. I mean, yes, we have the National Yiddish Theater downtown, which ends up taking shows from downtown to Broadway sometimes commercially or off Broadway, but that's Yiddish theater, which, yes, Yiddish as a language is core to Judaism, but it's not like an act. It's not like the Jewish Museum puts on plays and brings that to Broadway. Like you're not getting anything like that. What made me more hesitant before this season, even last season, was watching the Billy Crystal musical, Mr. Saturday Night. And I was at the Tony Awards and I sat there and I watched him, and Billy Crystal's the most amazing performer in the entire world. And I just thought, like, is this the end? Like, is it like that was his generation and we're just kind of like the parody of matzo balls and like
Yep.
Neil Simon comedy? And I mean, that traditionally was what people loved to see on Broadway. Like you see a Neil Simon show and that kind of embodied the essence of being a Jew, because Neil Simon was a Jew. So he really wrote about the experience. Today on Broadway, I find that a lot of our experience isn't really empowering. It always kind of feels dark and made to make us feel bad. And I was telling my fiance this the other day. I really believe this, that culturally, we have an identity in the U.S. that is very sad as Jews. In the U.S., it's, we have Holocaust Memorial Day. We have, like a whole month kind of dedicated to that. But we don't have like a Jewish Heritage Month that actually is very empowering. I mean, from what I gather, most of my Jewish peers in the entertainment space, they just see Judaism as like a remembrance of the Holocaust and not the 5,000
a remembrance of what was.
Yeah, but not even a remembrance of even before that. Like there's been great scholarship with the Jewish people. I'm surprised there's never actually been a show about a scholar or like the Lubavitcher Rebbe or like a movement, like an empowering movement, something that's like, wow, this is something that if I walk down the streets of New York, I'm going to see a picture of the Lubavitcher Rebbe somewhere. And that should be like noted, like that's something that's pretty darn powerful.
So there
that
was
there's like,
maybe one exception. There was that plane that landed in like Canada, and then there was like a Chabad rabbi that took the people off the plane and fed the Jews Shabbos food. You know what I'm talking about?
oh, you're talking about come from away.
But
Yeah,
I don't know if they actually was the rabbi like cast. Did a Jew play him? Were any Orthodox Jews consulted in the making of the show? Like even if that was a nice story to be told, which it was as far as I can tell. Like did Jews get the same sort of I don't know like privileges as other groups in terms of telling their authentic story or making sure that it was done correctly?
Yeah, that show actually had a lot of research done into it. It's one of those shows that I didn't get to see because I thought it was going to be open after COVID and then it closed. And then I was in Israel and I missed it. And I was really sad about it because I've heard just the most amazing things about it. I know that I think for Parade, they definitely had a rabbi on it. I think that was in the New York Times that they had a rabbi and they also had like a priest or a reverend or something on it. But um, I just, I don't know. I mean, spoiler alert, if you haven't seen Parade, it's about a lynching. Like it's a really dark show. Like it's
Yeah.
not a happy go lucky, woo, there's a parade going on. Like
Right.
it's
Right.
sad. It's really, really sad. I mean, it's like I had other Jewish people telling me that are in the Orthodox community. I don't really know if I want to go see Parade, or I don't really know if I want to see Leopoldstadt. It doesn't sound happy. It doesn't sound like it paints us in a good way.
Mhm. So look, Leopoldstadt was very meaningful, and we went, and we're going to take our kids to go. But I hear your point. Like, where are the stories of joy? Where are the stories where we can sing and lean in and feel like we're part of something that's alive and vibrant and growing? And I totally agree that too many Jews see their Jewishness as sort of like the high holiday guilt, the sort of Hebrew school boringness, the sort of remembrance of all the people that were killed, as opposed to sort of living a vibrant and joyful Jewish life. The way that my mother raised us was we must marry a Jew because of the Holocaust and the pogroms. And if she was on a roll, she would invoke the Inquisition. So, yes, I agree that we need to sort of engender a more positive Jewish experience. And, plays and musicals could potentially be a place to do that. Look, we don't have bandwidth to conquer Hollywood and Broadway at the same time, but you've certainly put Broadway on our radar as a place that we would love to get to at some point. And in the meantime, maybe there is a show or musical that could be developed, and maybe you could be the Tony-winning Orthodox producer to help make it happen. So we wish Sweeney Todd luck for the Tony Awards, and yeah, so grateful for you to come out and kind of give us an inside scoop to your journey as a Jew, as a producer, and to start putting some of these stories out there, because the other Orthodox Jewish producer that you mentioned, like, we don't know who that is. There continues to be Jews in hiding, Orthodox Jews in hiding, in the 21st century, when there's such an attitude of so many groups celebrating who they are. So thank you for telling the story publicly, and we'll keep an eye on you and your continued success.
Wonderful. Also, just one more point. There's something really powerful about the Jews in culture and in storytelling that I hope that everyone on this podcast can hear and take in, which is comedy is usually people tell jokes to hide pain. Like people tell jokes to mask pain. So if you're telling satirical jokes, it's because you're hiding pain that you've had, which is why Jews, through all the anti-Semitism we've had over many, many, many centuries, we mask our pain through laughing, because in theater and in Hollywood and in all entertainment, you can either laugh or cry. It's not really a lot. Not really a go-between, and that's why you have the famous Greek faces of someone sobbing and someone laughing, because that's how you see it. But I really hope that for Jewish narratives going forward, that we can just have a celebration for the sake of celebrating and have stories that are really just powerful stories that I know exist, that are out there. They did do a Karl Bach musical at one point that was off Broadway that I never saw, but it was kind of more about the controversial figure of Karl Bach and less of just like the joyous music of Karl Bach. But I think Fiddler is always that story the story that even in like suffering and even in pogroms, there is room to celebrate. There's room for weddings. There's room for simcha. I hope that the Jewish people can continue to make shows that have that narrative, because I think that is why Broadway was created.
Totally. Well, amen to that. And thanks so much for joining us. And to our audience, you can catch us same time, same place next week. Bye-bye.